are you being asked as a token woman, or do they really
Yes.
want you there? And it's the same with external professorial panels, I think, things like that.
You do find that a bit of a added stress?
I don't know. I think you wonder, but I mean, the few I've done, I felt I was there in my own right.
What about in the college?
In the college, yeah, and I think I was quite old by the time I went there, or perhaps I should say senior, so I tended to be put on things like appeals committees. I'm on the University Appeals Committee, not that it meets, the Stipend Review Committee, things like that, where they want someone a little bit more experienced, perhaps.
Yeah, and you quite enjoy those things, so.
Yes, I enjoy things like that, yes. Yes. I think we all grumble about box ticking and process that has expanded over the years. Right,
well, let's return to your the sequence of your life. You were at Hatfield till about 85.
85.
And then what happened?
Then I moved to Cambridge. I got my PhD, I think that was 81, and carried on working on lecturing in the same area and supervised a couple of PhDs at Hatfield. I got a research grant. Yes, that was a big thing, in that there wasn't the culture that everyone knew about research councils and how to get grants, and I have no idea how I came to know about you can apply for grants, but maybe someone suggested it. So I got a small research grant, and then started to go to it was the CERC in those days, the Science and Engineering Research Council, and they had workshops, and so everyone working in distributed computing came together quite regularly, and these were very good things for me, because I was at Hatfield, very teaching orientated, although I tried to go in the research direction, and then I suddenly met people from everywhere at the CERC workshops in distributed computing. So I went to a lot of those and met everyone, and then I suppose this gave me the confidence to think, well, I could apply for jobs, it's time to move on. And I applied I happened to just open the Guardian one day, and there was an application, a job advertised for Cambridge, and also one for University College London, so off I went to both.
You applied to both, but you got into both, and then
I got into both.
And decided on Cambridge.
I had to decide between commuting from Watford to London every day, or whether I'd go to Cambridge. And I thought, I'll try Cambridge, find out what it's like. Because I'd always rather regretted not going to Cambridge as an undergraduate.
Had you? Had you met any Cambridge people at these sort of CERC meetings, or? I
met Cambridge people throughout, really. At the NPL at GC, there were two Cambridge mathematicians, and Jim Wilkinson at NPL was sort of way ahead of the Trinity. As a maths tripos as a Trinity student when he was an undergraduate, and he was very, very clever. So I kept coming across these brilliant Cambridge mathematicians, which made me realise for the first time that it's actually a very good place rather than something for public school children, which I'd not really understood when I was at school.
Had you met lots of brilliant Oxford mathematicians as well, or not?
No, I hadn't, no.
So Cambridge
began to feel very special, and gosh, I missed a chance when I was at school and not going there.
I didn't quite catch your last comment about grammar school. It's sort of, because this is an interesting theme, I mean, had you felt that perhaps Cambridge was a place where it wouldn't be so easy to fit in with your background?
Yes, I did feel like that. It was because I'd been in the sixth form for years, it seemed, and I was ready to go, and I wasn't ready to stay another year to do a Cambridge scholarship. Although I'd done the Latin, so I could have, we needed Latin in those days, so did that just in case. But I was ready to go, and my friends who were perhaps a bit older were already going, and so I just didn't try. And I did feel I was more working class than some of them, and it wasn't for the likes of me.
Yeah, that's what
that was the thing.
Yeah, I was wondering about. And was that reinforced when you came here or not?
No, not at all.
Really? Oh,
yeah.
Say it loudly.
Our
Vice-Chancellor needs your voice.
Right. Yeah, I met people like Ken whose friends were from all over the world and from the northern grammar schools
Mm.
also, and he directed studies in King's for ages, and he'd had people from northern grammar schools all the time,
Mm.
and King's had always been into outreach, and so I found it was not at all like I'd expected.
No difficulty at all.
No difficulty.
You never had it since?
No.
No. Do you think that's general, or do you think computing science and mathematics and maybe the sciences are easier because there's a common language? And
It may be. Going back to the reunions that I
Mm.
had with people I was at school with, someone last summer said, oh, the people I was competing against to try and do languages in Oxford, they were so much better educated. They'd been to the lycée, they spoke fluently from birth, or all things like that. And she certainly felt that she wasn't on a level playing field.
Yes, well, I think even in the 70s, 80s, it was changing a lot, wasn't it? And, but some people who I've interviewed did find colleges particularly rather odd, and for instance, I'm sure he won't mind Dan Brown, who came from Glasgow when he first came to Christ or wherever it was. He found it pretty intolerable, very snobby and conservative and ritualistic and so on. But you never felt that?
I ended up at Jesus, and we had David Crichton as master, who sadly died, and then Robert Mayer as master, and they're both very much mathematicians, engineers, my kind of person. Colin Renfrew before those two, just overlapped a little bit with him.
Yeah.
Newnham was too much like Royal Holloway, so...
On the edge and all women.
Yes, that's right. So it wasn't really the place for me. I did try to help the women students, but as I say, there weren't enough of them.
What were you mainly working on when you came to Cambridge? What was it still in distributed?
It was still distributed systems. Operating systems at the lower level, rather less as the years went by, but distributed systems.
And what were the main developments this is the late 80s and 90s?
Late 80s and 90s, I had a project in filing systems, how you might have distributed components with multimedia was becoming just about possible with computers, and so how do you store that and how do you deliver it in without jitter and fast enough and so on. We were also getting on to the stage where we started off saying, oh, software needs to communicate, so the source of any communication was always a software component for quite a long time. Then we got to the stage where we're monitoring the environment, where things happen. Just at first there are mouse events in a single computer, but these are sort of coming in unpredictably from outside. And this has moved on to sensors monitoring the environment, or medical sensors monitoring people for their health, looking at their body symptoms to see whether they're all right. Traffic monitoring. So we've moved to the paradigm where events are coming from outside the computer system, and we've got to respond to them. So it's what's called an asynchronous paradigm. Instead of just components are just interacting to get the job done, that's pre-specified and known in advance.
One of the things that's probably related to that, I talked to Ken, my husband, about occasionally. I remember some years ago he used to refuse to fill in his census because he said he didn't know what they were going to do with all these questions.
Right.
And he's always been nervous about data surveillance and so on. With talking of sensors and other things like this, is this something that you've been interested in or worried about at all?
Yeah, that's a different thread. Access control is something my group's worked on access control for quite a long time, and we've worked with medics on electronic health records and how you specify who should be able to see what data. And the special thing about healthcare data is that it persists, its sensitivity persists for a lifetime and longer. So if you have, say, cancer records, something like that, it's not like a battle where the data's confidential for a day and then it doesn't matter who knows what. It's confidential indefinitely. And so you have to really worry about how it's encrypted. If it's encrypted, does it actually get transferred in encrypted form? How long are those keys going to be secure? Enough bits as the time goes by to be secure. Maybe you don't even send all the data outside where it lives. You have to anonymise it or fuzzify some of the fields and make sure that you know certain records all relate to the same person, but not that anybody can see which person it is outside where the one place where the records are held. So issues like that.
Given all of your attention to this and other people's attention to it, it's the obvious question, why is it that there have been recently so many disastrous releases of medical and other data?
Yes, I mean, we've always known that the highest bandwidth way of transferring data is on, used to be a disk, now it's on a memory stick, and people are not taking care. So laptops are portable, memory sticks and disks are portable, so as soon as you get huge amounts of data on these devices, you can just carry it around, and if they're not careful then it gets lost. Whereas our research was just, if you're trying to transfer a tiny part from a database, be very careful what you do.
Is there any way of preventing this?
It just has to be human processes, I think.
It is a human problem, there's nothing to do.
I think so. The devices are so portable and there are so many of them, and they're so, you can hold so much information on such a small device.
Given the amount of information that is now being collected on us and will be collected and synthesized together, is there any assurance that this won't flit off to the Russian mafia or elsewhere?
It is very scary, I think. The human element is the weakness, I think. I suppose you just have to store everything encrypted, make sure it's not allowed to go onto laptops that have sensitive data without being encrypted.
But are they doing that?
I hope so. I mean, the company who lost the data recently have been dismissed as auditors or whatever they were doing.
But there have been several losses, haven't there, in different forms?
Yes, all of similar kinds. Yes.
And that's just accidental losses. If there are very large sums of money to be made by sending your people into these places to work and then take away things, I mean.
Yes, so, yeah, industrial espionage and so on. It seems it's become too easy to get large amounts of data. Let's
turn to one or two people in Cambridge who you got to know. You must have known both Roger Needham and Karen Spark-Jones. Tell me something about them as people.
Yeah, Roger was head of department when I came to Cambridge. In fact, well, he interviewed me along with several others. And Roger and Karen were very kind and helpful when I first came, and had me around to dinner, and they'd built their own house in Coton.
I have an image of two houses next door to each other. Is that
I
filled with books?
Possibly, but I think her mother lived in the second house when I first came, but she died sometime later.
What sort of people were they? I mean, intense.
Oh, Karen was very, very trying to do things all the time, and came over as quite dogmatic, really. Definite is the word. And she'd come and say, "Oh, Jane, what are you going to do about this? And you better do something." She was genuinely interested in computing, and
Her main work was in natural language.
It was in natural language processing and information retrieval, which of course came into its own when the web was invented in the early 90s. Before that, it was closed collections in libraries.
Information retrieval has been the field that Ken and I have worked on together. Is Cambridge an important centre for the development of that?
Information retrieval, well, I suppose Karen's group, the natural language processing group, yes, but I didn't associate the kind of IR with Cambridge before I came. There was someone called Salton at Cranfield who wrote a book on information retrieval way back in, must be the 1970s.
It wasn't COD, no, that was databases.
That was databases. Yeah, this is Salton at Cranfield. I'm sure Karen knows all of these people, but it was so easy then because you'd a closed collection, you knew what you should have retrieved and what you didn't retrieve that you didn't get, and on the web you've no idea what you didn't get. So it's quite a different problem.
Have any of the early programs in probabilistic or Bayesian retrieval and so on developed in Cambridge, been important at all on the web?
I don't know, it's not my area.
Mm.
I think Keith van Rijsbergen has taken the more statistical approach to IR further.
His work is important.
His work's important.
And
in
Martin
that area,
Porter's.
I think. Martin Porter's, yes.
Mm.
Yeah, it isn't my area though, so I knew of the group, Steve Pullman and Karen, and then Ted Briscoe came later, but I've never worked with them.
And Ken was mainly working on database systems.
Yes, that's right. I did actually work with one student on an MPhil project for the natural language processing, because we wanted to be able to express who can access which electronic health records. And we worked with Steve Pullman, and you could say something like, only the doctor who is the registered doctor for this patient may see the health record, and you could write it in what Steve called discourse diagrams, and then you could turn it into predicate calculus, and then you could generate code from that, Java code, I think. So there was one project that did allow us to interact with the NLP group, but that was my only experience. So it was trying to express policy. So there is a human language element, obviously, in trying to say what policy you want for who can see what on the web. And it was attempt to controlled English, I think, comes to mind, that was being used.
Talking about the predecessors and the successors to Roger, I mean, the predecessor was presumably Maurice Wilks.
It was Maurice Wilks, yes.
Tell me something about Maurice.
Maurice is extremely courteous. He's always been so nice to me. I felt like I was unknown, and this person coming into his laboratory, and yeah, I thought he was always extremely nice.
And a good organiser.
A good organiser, a brilliant lecturer, and still is a brilliant lecturer. And I mean, he's so good. He gives out the diploma students.
He started the diploma, didn't he?
He did, yes.
The first in the world.
Yes, the first course in the world. And
that was in the late 40s, early 50s, early 50s, perhaps.
Yes, and he's just given the final set of diploma certificates out.
That's a historic course, isn't it?
Yes, very much so. It's a pity it's finished.
Yes, why is it finished?
Oh, because the government wanted master's training programs instead of conversion courses. And our diploma has converted so many wonderful mathematicians and physicists and scientists of all kinds to computing. It has done an enormous service, and they go and get jobs now as physicists and mathematicians and scientists and just do the computing without being educated in it. So I think it's a great pity that course is finished. But it was 5 years or so ago we lost the 20-something studentships, and the course has then declined since then.
Same thing happened in our project.
Right.
Though we still use the MPhil as a double, as a conversion and as a topping up, but we conceal the fact, perhaps. No, not really. What was Wilks? I mean, as a computing person, how high is his standing?
Oh, it's the highest, really. He's first of all a pioneer, but then he's kept up all his life, all the way through. And when you think he's retired before I came to Cambridge, and he's still lecturing. Yes.
Well, his grandson, so to speak, Andy Hopper, says that when Maurice comes in, he asks him very penetrating questions.
Yes.
And he has to think carefully.
Yes, be very careful, yes. Oh my gosh. Put me on the spot there. And David Wheeler was the same.
Was he?
He's a brilliant
Was he the head of the computing?
No, David wasn't.
But he was a very important figure, wasn't he?
He was a very important figure.
He worked with Srinathara, I think.
Did he? Okay, right.
Tell me about David.
David, he was again a very, very nice person. Very courteous again, supportive, but he was just a brilliant mathematician and brilliant at security. So again, I don't know enough to speak very knowledgeably about his work, but David has such a high reputation.
And then your current head of
Andy.
Andy Hopper, yes.
Yes.
Tell me about Andy.
Well, he's brilliant head of department. It's great to have him around.
I mean, he's a representative of a phenomenon which, according to Hammond, was encouraged by Roger Needham, which was not being too picky about allowing people to both work for the university and develop,
Okay, right.
which Herman said was one of the keys to the Cambridge phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's probably right, yes. I was so sorry when Andy left us to go to engineering. It was awful at that half end. And then we were so pleased to have him back.
Why did he do that?
I think that it was who gets a professorship. So there were 2 professorships advertised, one in the computer lab and one in engineering. And it was timing of interviews and who gets offered what when. So Ian, Leslie and Andy both got chairs.
I see.
And Ian was in the lab, computer lab, and Andy was in engineering.
But then he came back.
Then he came back to be head of department after Ian went to be Pro-Vice-Chancellor.
How does Andy, I mean, I got some impression from interviewing him, but he does so many things. He's on the board of a number of these science companies, and he flies around the world all the time and
Yes.
does this and does that.
Yes.
He must be a man of enormous energy and...
Energy and inventiveness, I think, all the way through his career, almost the things that came out of his research group and his companies were just things he'd thought of. The active badge, here am I, the door opens when I approach it, and I can log in and send my message or send my environment to the nearest computer, find out where my badge is. I mean, Andy just dreamed all this up. And all the location technology and such like.
What about, I mentioned, I think possibly, the plastic logic and the new generation of transistors?
I don't know that.
You don't know
I'm not a hardware expert.
Because that's probably going to have a big effect. And that's where it's tying up with people who Andy knew as a physics graduate in.
Oh, okay, yes.
Like Richard Friend and Hermann Heiser and so on.
Right, yes.
Have you had any dealing with this sort of huge fringe of activities around Cambridge, which are many of them tied up with the computing laboratory?
Not so many. No, we've interacted with clinical and biomedical computing, who are in the same place as Carrot, who you mentioned just now, for the electronic health records. So not so much the Andy's spin-off companies.
Are there ever difficulties or conflicts of interest and so on?
No, I haven't come across any problems. And we make our software available from the research grants. We just put it on our website and it's downloaded by people who want to use it.
What do you... Sorry.
So I was going to say, I think I'm a bit too old to have been in the spin-off a company generation.
Well, Ken said he'd only once done some sort of consultancy, which had earned him some money, but
right, okay.
he didn't.
Yes.
Tell me something about your partnership with Ken. I mean, you don't work on the same computing problems, but the fact that you're both computing people presumably gives you a lot to talk about.
Oh, we work on the same research grants.
You do?
Yes. I suppose this is how we got together, really. Distributed systems. So he was in databases, and I suppose was interested in distribution and concurrency control, and so there was an overlap in interests. And I suppose over the years we got research grants together, and the interests sort of coincided rather more as the years went by. So I was in operating systems, he was in databases, then I moved to middleware and distributed computing, and he was interested in distribution. But he's a good theoretician as well, so he can give the theory courses.
That implies you're not a good theoretician.
I've not kept up. I'm de-skilled as a mathematician.
But he teaches maths. I mean, he's director of studies for many years.
He's amazing. He's kept the maths going, and he can do the exam questions. And when a new set of exam papers comes out, he sits there and makes sure he can do them all for the students he's supervising.
Gosh.
So
he's such a modest person. He would. I'm glad you told me that. It's sometimes quite difficult if you're exactly in the same field. There are advantages, but also it's difficult to know when to cut off from work and so on. Have you ever found that? I mean, when you're wandering through the Pyrenees, taking photographs of flowers, are you also discussing
Not very
computing?
often, just occasionally.
Mm.
It has worked extremely well. I think we got together as much through me trying to find nature reserves when I came to Cambridge as through the overlapping of interests at work and trying to find somewhere to paint. And King's had a studio, so yeah, several different things.
Tell me something about that side of you, the painting. I mean, you said you started pretty young, but
yes, I've always somehow tried to paint, whether it was an evening class or just something all the time. So when I came to Cambridge from Hatfield, I was trying to find somewhere where I could just keep this going once a week or something like that. And King's had, I think they had a donation from somebody, and it allowed them to appoint not an artist in residence as such, but someone to do teaching. I think you've had both concepts, haven't you? Artist in residence, and I'm not sure what the title is, but we still have. Don Stubbs has just been appointed to replace Rose Rance, who died. And so I worked with Hermione Holmes at first, and then Rose Rance after that. And at that stage, I'd never had exhibitions. It hadn't occurred to me, but Rose was so encouraging, and Rose and Nelson, that I did this, and it was something to really work for. And I think it's a great thing because it sort of focuses you, and you do work for it. You get a set of work, and you put it up, and
it clears it away.
Yes,
you don't have to start again.
Yes, that's right. It's a focus, and it gives you confidence if you feel, gosh, I'm not too ashamed of that.
It's rather a nice combination because yours are very beautiful, mainly nature subjects, and Ken, I didn't know, but he takes photographs of an overlapping kind. Has he always done that? Or was it through your
Yes, he's always
influence?
taken photographs. Yes, I think the flowers was something he came to do because I was interested, so he would take the flower photographs for me. But he would do butterflies and birds more recently when he got a camera that could actually take the birds. He's done a lot more of that. But the Reed Bed project over the last 2 or 3 years has been a joint project because we moved to Suffolk. Ken sold his house in Napwell, 300-year-old thatched cottage. We were spending most of the time in my house in Cambridge, so I sold Ken's cottage, bought a house in Suffolk near the coast. And of course there are reed beds there, and they're just so wonderful, and they all through the year, the way the light falls on them. In January the light's low, you get wonderful effects. And I got very interested and asked him to take photographs, and he did this all the way through, I think 2005. And then I started the painting project after that. And he's still taking reed beds. It's 2008.
So is that how you're, I mean, Ken is more or less retiring now, isn't he? And you're retiring?
I have another 2 years officially before I should retire. Excuse me. I have a couple of research, sorry, I've got a frog in my throat.
Let me just...
New research grant starting in October, and that goes on for 3 years, and 2 new PhD students, one on the grant and one on a case studentship. So that's 3 years commitment. So although I'm supposed to retire in 2 years, I may well, at least try and linger on at the lab, just doing the research for a further year.
You enjoy it?
I very much enjoy it, yes.
So one retires in, it varies from subject to subject. I mean, can you go on if you bring in new research grants, or is it difficult?
Yes, I think so. I mean, it's been such a privilege to work with the bright young academics as postdocs and young lecturers. I think I'd miss that terribly, and would like to carry on doing it for a while longer.
How many PhDs have you supervised?
I was just doing my CV the other day, 37.
37, and we're about equal, I think.
Right, yes.
And a lot of MPhils and so on.
Okay, yes.
You don't find it stressful worrying about them and when they don't, when it's not going well, or when they can't get jobs, or...
I always worry about them. I worry about whether I've done all I should have done and things like that, but I think getting jobs isn't a problem.
No, you're in a good field.
In a good field for getting jobs, yes.
Just one sort of last general question. Having watched this amazing development of computing in the last 40 years, and having been part of it myself, all one can say is that at any stage one could never have predicted what was going to happen next. So it's an unfair question to ask you to predict what you think will be the exciting things that will happen in the next 10 or 20 years. But
I don't know about 10 or 20. I mean, the exciting things that are happening at the moment are, in my sort of level or lower level now, is the fact that a single computer is a multiprocessor. So I've always worked in concurrency control. I wrote a book called Concurrent Systems. I've had PhD students sort of in that area, and there is one currently doing very good work on sort of threading architectures. And this is coming into its own because instead of having a single processor per computer with a memory, you're now always going to have 2 or 3 or 4 or many computers, many processors. So you need to be able to exploit that, and it's difficult because the concurrency means that they may be interfering with each other's data unless you take steps to avoid it. So that's one problem that has to be solved, and it's sort of come around full circle.
Because many computers like the Apple G5 has dual processing and so on.
Yes. Well, for a long time you could assume one machine was one processor, so you could solve concurrency problems simply.
And that's going to increase the power hugely.
It's going to it's going to make the software go wrong. Particularly if you let application programmers program parallel systems, they'll make mistakes.
Just one last note. I noticed that you didn't have a computer, or at least certainly not an internet connection in your house in Suffolk.
No.
Are there times you had to be away from machines?
Yes, it's very relaxing to go to Suffolk, because in my house in Cambridge I've got broadband and I'm logging on all the time, so after supper I'll just check email just to see if everyone's alright. But in Suffolk you feel as though a load's gone off your shoulders as you go down there, because there's no television and no internet, lots of music, lots of walking, and it's very nice.
It is indeed very nice, and I enjoyed our time with you, and I'd like to thank you very much indeed, Jean, for a lovely interview.
Thank you.